Hello, welcome back to Chasing the Dream, a workplace culture podcast. I'm Ethan, I'm your host. I'm a New York-based organization development coach, and I love specializing in culture transformation. And today I'm really excited to introduce our guest, Aoife O'Brien, who's the host of her own amazing podcast called Happier at Work. And it's a platform that she's created and is dedicated to utilizing to help women in the organizations that they work for to create more positive workplace cultures to support women, female leaders and enable them to thrive. Eve conducts many speaking engagements and has created an online program, an online series of programs, including her two award-winning flagship programs, Imposter to Empowered and Accelerating Leadership Excellence. And Aoife is going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that she faced in her career, some things like a toxic workplace environment, misogyny, and being passed over for earned promotions and not feeling valued. And this other thing we refer to as imposter syndrome. And it's her singular focus to provide support to women that she wished she received earlier in her career. So Aoife, without further ado, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Ethan. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's my absolute privilege.
It's actually our privilege, but we'll just agree it's mutual.
Mutual privilege.
One of the things I was hoping we could start out with was the last time we spoke, were very kind to walk me through the narrative arc, the journey of your career. And I was wondering if you could share some of your experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose all of the experiences that I've had in my work to date is culminated in the work that I do now. So I worked quite early career. I worked in Dublin and then I moved to London because it was something I'd always wanted to do. And I was waiting for someone to take me by the hand, but that never happened. So I decided I need to make this happen myself. So I moved to London and I spent 3.5 years there in the most wonderful organization, I have to say. When I look back there now, it was just a really fantastic experience. And fast forward a few years later, I found myself in Sydney and I was working in an organization that a lot of people who I had previously worked with in London were working there. So I assumed that it was going to be quite a similar culture, but it wasn't. And within a couple of months, I noticed something, that there was a really high turnover. There was something up with the culture I couldn't quite place my finger on, didn't really know what was going on. People were coming to me asking me questions about the systems, even though I was still relatively new compared to them. They had been there for a few years. And I suppose that made me think I'm doing really well here. I'm doing good work. People are coming, they're approaching me and things like that. And I had a discussion prior to starting in the role that I was going to be promoted to director, and a number of subsequent discussions asking me, well, what kind of director would you like to be? Would you like to just be in a standalone role? Would you like to direct a team? Like all of these really positive and reinforcing questions. And there was a structural change happening in the organization. And after that structural change, I had a conversation with someone who was my friend and my peer, and he started asking questions about my clients, which I thought, again, was quite out of the ordinary. I didn't really know why he was asking those questions. And it transpired that he had been promoted to be my boss, but that hadn't been communicated to me. So he basically said, I was like, well, why are we having this conversation? Why are we talking about my clients? And he said, I'm your boss now. And I was really stunned and shocked, because to me, that meant, okay, he got that job that they've been talking to me about for months. And like, maybe he doesn't know what's going on either, but he was my peer. And really, I was really shocked and surprised at that decision, essentially. So I didn't stay too much longer in that organization because I didn't feel very valued. I didn't feel like it was somewhere that I could progress, especially when they're saying things like that, when they're doing things like that. When someone, when I questioned the leader who I had previously been speaking to about this promotion, when I questioned him, he said, oh, well, he's really more of your supervisor. He's not really your manager. And if you want mentoring, if you want that level of support, you need to go to his manager. And so I went to his manager, and his manager brought my direct boss into that meeting
Oh
without
my
talking to me
goodness.
about it in advance. So there was all of these things going on that really made me feel I am not in the right place. So I looked for something else, and I couldn't find anything that suited me in Sydney. And I also questioned, do I really want to stay here for another 2 or 3 years? So I left. I left that organization, and they probably thought I was going to stay. They probably thought, golden handcuffs, I'm going to stay in this situation
Right.
because I'm
Right.
sponsored. I'm a foreigner here, and I need to have that sponsorship in order to be able to work. They were paying me a really high salary as well, which I was really pleased with, because especially at the time it was a really good exchange rate in my favor, converting from Australian dollars back into euros. So they probably thought she's going nowhere. So anyway, I left that organization. And again, it when I think back on that time, I think, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? How did I end up in this situation? How could I have managed my career better? And I really blamed myself, and it was a huge knock to my confidence. But
Sure.
at the same time, I was also thinking, what should the organization have done differently? How could the leadership have been more effective? What should HR have been doing? How could they have stepped in? There were all of these questions, both from the individual perspective and from the organizational perspective. And I suppose that has shaped everything that I do. So I always like to think from the individual perspective, how can I, as an individual, I mean this more broadly for anyone who is listening or anyone who is watching, how can I, as an individual, take responsibility for my career? How can I make better decisions? How can I understand myself better so I know what's going to suit me really, really well and what's not going to suit me really very well at all? And then from an organization's perspective, how do we bring in those people into the organization who are really going to thrive and do their best work and help us to solve these really challenging problems that we're trying to solve as an organization? How can we bring those right people in, put them in the right roles where they're really going to excel and do their best work and stay with us for a long time as well?
Where was, in terms of the kind of journey that you went through? So you have this really, really upsetting experience, and then you
Mm.
decide that you're not going to stay there, and then you transition. Did you go directly from that experience into happier at work? Were there other stops along the way? Because you said that you did leave despite the golden handcuffs.
I did leave. I did leave despite the golden handcuffs, and other people call them very. And I didn't get a golden parachute, if that's what you're
No,
thinking as
well,
well.
we people like us refer to feeling the need to stay because of security as
Yeah,
indentured servitude. We
yeah,
call
exactly.
it,
Yeah,
the paycheck, and as you said, the
yeah,
compensation. So I'm curious,
yeah,
despite your decision, when you realized it was time to leave, where did you go next? Like, what was the
yeah.
next step in the journey?
Absolutely. So I traveled. I left that organization and I traveled. I traveled for as long as I could in Australia, as long as my visa allowed me, which I think was an additional 3 months of a tourist visa. So I traveled around more of Australia because I had seen quite a lot of it already. I also spent a little bit of time in New Zealand. I went to Fiji, and then I landed in Hawaii, would you believe? And I traveled around the US for about 3 months, and this was all in the run up to
Right.
Christmas and New Year's. And so I got to experience Thanksgiving when I was in New York, or should I say, the most exciting time for me was the night before Thanksgiving, when people went out and
Right.
they were playing. I'm trying to think of the name. Is it beer pong or something like that in the pubs? And it was such a lot. It was just such great fun.
Mhm.
So I traveled and I went home and I spent some time with my family. And when I was booking flights, and this is kind of my driving force, I suppose, when I was booking flights back to Dublin from New York, it was actually $20 cheaper to buy a return flight than it was to buy a one-way flight. Don't ask me how, don't ask me why, but it was cheaper to buy a return flight. So I bought a return flight and I came back to New York in the new year, and I flew to Miami to see a friend, and I flew to Argentina, and I spent 5 or 6 months traveling around South America. And then I came back to Ireland and I was tired and I was weary from traveling and I needed a job because I'd spent a lot of money while I was traveling. And I took on another role and I stayed there for 4.5 years. And it wasn't quite a toxic working environment, but, and again, 20, what did they say? Hindsight is 2020 vision. It's so easy to look
Correct.
back and realize it wasn't quite the same level of toxicity as the original place, but I really didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I could thrive in that environment. I had all of this global experience. I had worked in London, I had worked in Australia. It wasn't really going recognized in the place that I was. And so I ended up staying for 4.5 years. Initially, I loved it. And it was kind of a roller coaster. I loved it, then I hated it, then I loved it, then I hated it. I got a few promotions, but my most recent role, that kind of brought everything to a head where they gave me an option and they said, you can stay at the level you're at, doing something that you're really good at and that you really enjoy, and you'll be reporting into this other woman. She's on the senior leadership team. Or you can join the senior leadership team in an area that you don't care that much about. They didn't obviously express it in this way, but it was an honest conversation. An area that maybe you won't necessarily excel in. And again, this is all 50 or 2020 vision with hindsight.
Right.
They, I'm sure, expected me to do as good a job as I was doing in previous roles. And I said yes, because I didn't know the impact that it was going to have.
Can I
And
just ask can I ask
yes,
the confirmation of the two options? You chose the
yeah,
latter, where you chose not to direct to the woman executive and in an area in which you felt maybe it wasn't an optimal fit?
exactly. That's
Okay.
exactly what I chose. I chose from an ego perspective, that's maybe me being a bit hard on myself. I chose the option to be on the senior leadership team alongside her rather than reporting into her. And I would make that decision, the same decision today. I think, knowing her and knowing how she operates, I would have preferred not to report into her, while others were saying I should have actually had the role that she had. But that's a conversation for another day. I'm not going to go
Okay.
down that road. Um, so anyway, yeah, I took this, but it was only in hindsight that I realized that where I really excel would have been in the data and the analytics and dealing with clients, whereas where I was the head of client service, but that's across all of our clients and very kind of light touch involvement with clients on a day-to-day basis with their technical queries and their technical issues about databases and reports and things like that. Not, I did my best in the role that I had, but anything I do, I love to bring my all. I like to do an excellent job, a really, really excellent job, and get recognized for that. And I didn't feel like I had that opportunity where I was. Now, I did speak to my boss about that. We had a conversation about some potential global roles. I would still be based in Dublin. And about 3 months later, I just thought, I've had enough and I don't want to stay here anymore. And I handed in my notice. And, very shocking probably for someone from the US, but it was 3 months, a 3 month notice period, which is fairly standard at senior levels certainly in Ireland, I'm sure in the UK as well, and probably in the rest of Europe, where when you sign your contract for your job, you think, oh, I'm here forever. This
Correct.
is a long-term thing. You forget
Let's
the
let's just
pain.
agree that, let's agree that's fundamentally opposite or different than the American corporate
Yeah.
experience.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, but it just means that you're in the role for another 3 months doing something that you're going to be leaving and you're not
Right.
quite giving it your all. And it just, it's kind of dragged out. It's a long time, 3 months. Like 2 weeks is very short, but 3 months is a long time. So that was my kind of pit stop journey, let's say, on the way to happier at work. I left that organization. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a plan to set up a business. I studied career coaching, I studied executive and life coaching, and I went on to do a master's in organizational behavior, which I loved. And it brought together everything that I really enjoy doing. So it was looking at people's behavior, but especially in the work context. And given the experiences I had, this was really enlightening and I wanted to understand what really happened to me at work. So I spoke to one of my lecturers and she suggested researching this topic of fit and what it means to fit in at work. And I tie that with happiness at work. So from the research I did, I created this model around happiness at work and what that means. And the first aspect is looking at our values and understanding, well, what are my values and how do my values align to the values of the organization? And from the organization perspective, we say that these are our values, but is that the lived experience of the people who work here? Are people behaving in a way that is reflective of the values we say we have? So that's
Yeah, and
the
I just want to
values.
I want to draw a distinction to that because it's
Yeah.
really interesting because when we talked initially, you talked about this need for psychological safety. And then
Yeah.
you talked about the kind of narrative arc of your career, and you talked about
Mm.
what you're talking about now, which is the need to fit the values of the individual with the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
You and I both know something that I was wondering if you could pick up on as you put your framework together.
Yes.
When an organization constructs its culture, there's really two different things at play here, and they're not the same. One is aspirational culture. So the
Yeah.
organization can say, we have a great place for women, we have a career path to a trajectory for advancement. It's aspirational, it's what they want to believe. And then the other thing, as you said, is to put a finger on the pulse of what do employees feel when
Yeah.
they're there. And I guess I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how you identify the distinction
Yeah.
as a job seeker using your model, and then
Yeah.
maybe talk about, because you talked about values, and then you also talked about another piece of being needs
Yeah.
and also
Needs. Yeah.
strengths.
Strengths. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Love talk. I can't, I could talk about this stuff all day, but I suppose initially, let's talk about values. And you talking about aspirational values. Aspirational values to me are the values you say that you have,
right.
but maybe you don't actually have them. So there's the stuff that's in your email signatures. Maybe there's posters on the wall. Maybe they're there on reception for when visitors come to your
It's
organization.
marketing.
It's marketing for
It's
anyone who didn't
marketing.
know.
Yeah.
it's
Uh-huh.
it's and to me it's often aspirational because you're saying, and the example I always think of is this idea. One of the values that in one of the organizations I worked in was simple. Now, this organization was the most bureaucratic organization I ever worked in. And yes, exactly. If I, as an individual, wanted to send out a mass email through our marketing email system to, let's say, 100 of our clients, I had to get approval from one of two people based in the US in order for me to have permission to send out that email to my clients through the
Simple.
marketing system. Simple, they say, simple.
Simple.
Anything but simple. So, the aspirational values to me are what you say the values are, whether that is the lived experience of people on a day-to-day basis. And by lived experience, I mean the observable behaviors of people in that organization. So if I say we have a value of fairness, well, are you treating people fairly? Are things quite transparent? How is that actually showing up? So the observable behaviors, how are decisions actually made? Promotion decisions, are they made based on merit? Are they made based on politics and politicking and who knows who and all of that kind of thing? When it comes to hiring, are you bringing in people who have those same aspirational values that you want to have? Or are you bringing in people who are, and sometimes you might get a bit of flack for saying we're bringing in people like me. For me, the important thing when you're bringing people into an organization, and I'll get on to the other side, the job seekers in a second, but when you're bringing people into the organization, it's so important that they fit with the culture, but also that they bring something new. So for me, when I talk about values and values fit and culture fit, for me, it's so important to have diversity of thought. So do they think in a slightly different way? Do they have different types of experiences, maybe from different industries, different schools, different types of roles that they can bring with them to challenge how things are done, to bring in new thinking? And are people open to that new thinking as well? Because I do have an example from that same organization where I made a suggestion quite early on in my tenure there. I said, I think we have an opportunity to do something in this different way. I don't remember the exact precise details of it, but the feedback I got was, that's not how we do things around here.
That's the white flag. That's the white flag of an organization that's committed to not adapting and not
Yes.
flexible and not
Yeah.
also wanting their people's feedback.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's fascinating as an example.
Fascinating. Now, if we take a look from the job seeker's perspective, how do you find these organizations that have values that are aligned to yours? Well, most of them talk about their values on their website. So you can have a look on their website, see what they're saying. A lot of organizations make videos like, what's it like to work here? And they make videos of people. And I know a lot of this is kind of the marketing thing, like what we were talking about a
Right,
second ago. It
right,
is marketing to show this is what it's, to show the great stories. Hopefully, I haven't seen an example of this yet, but hopefully some are showing more authentic side. Yeah, it's busy here, but actually the work is really impactful. So I enjoy it. Whatever those kind of the real things that are happening. You can use not survey, but you can use websites like Glassdoor. What's it really like? What's the CEO like? What are the people who are leaving saying about this organization? Bear in mind that this often skews to the negative because
right,
people are not going to take to Glassdoor
right,
to write all the positive things about an
right,
organization. So take it with a pinch of salt, but you can still see what's going on there, and are
right.
things changing as well. So knowing what your own values are, what you stand for, I think is really important. And ways to do that can be, how do you spend your time, your energy, your money? What are things that really bother you as well? What annoys me? So maybe the opposite of what annoys me is something that I hold really strongly as a value and something I really, really believe in.
Hmm. You you and I had talked earlier, and you've kind of walked us today through the kind of earlier phase of your career and the formative moments, experiences that led to happier at work. And I had shared in the intro that you were kind enough to send me what you want to accomplish with happier at work in terms of the impact you want to have. So I guess my question is, moving forward, what would you like, what are you going to be focused on now and into the
Mm.
future? What do you want to see have happen as part of your legacy?
Yeah. So, well, obviously, there's the Happier at Work podcast. So that already I feel is part of my legacy. But for me, the huge focus for me is going to be on creating a technology solution. Now that AI has become much more accessible, I think we can use AI to solve a lot of those problems. I know we haven't had time today to go into a lot of detail across the different facets of the Happier at Work
That's
model.
on the second appearance.
There you go. Next time I'll be talking about need satisfaction at work and
Right.
using our strengths at work.
And
So
also
for
because your background is so astute in terms of the analytical and the
yeah,
quantifiable, and you talked to me
mm,
about the value, you've mentioned it a few times, the value of gathering data that you can
yeah,
put into the organization framework for
exactly.
assessing those individuals.
Yes.
Um, we'll definitely revisit that because I think one of the frustrations an organization may have is, Aoife, we want to move forward, but we don't know how to create the culture so that we can benchmark, how we're
Mm,
getting to a great place to work. And also what you said earlier, how do you bring in people through the recruiting and talent
yeah.
acquisition who, as you said, the fit. You've said a
Yeah.
number of times about the need to fit the values of the
Yeah.
individual in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, if I'm being perfectly honest, the idea of matching people with organizations through values is a mammoth task. It's
Mm.
huge. Maybe it's something that AI can help us with in the future. I don't know. It's something I've tried, I've started, but I haven't quite got there yet. Because if you think of all the potential possible values that people could have, and then the number of organizations that exist and the varying values that they have, it seems like quite a huge task. So I have another idea in the background for that. But for the immediate, for me, the big focus is on understanding talent. So if we think of an organization, like let's say a large organization like the one I worked in, I think there were 40,000 employees.
Mm.
And I left because I didn't see a path forward. I wasn't happy where I was, and I didn't see a path forward for where I could go next that really tapped into the strengths that I have. And what if an organization could, at a glance, see who has the strengths and the skills that we need for this role that we have over here? And then as an individual, I can use that technology to manage my career because I know the direction that I want to go in. I know the skills that I want to tap into, to utilize. I know the level that I want to go in the role that I have. So from an organization's perspective, it's not having to look outside the organization to bring in external talent. It's looking at the talent that you have currently and seeing how can we best deploy that. Are the people in the right roles? And I think this is an issue for a lot of people, that they're not in the right roles, but they don't really know what they want next or what direction they could potentially take, especially if they consider the organization that they're in. Sometimes we wait and we expect for opportunities to fall into our laps, for someone to tell us about something. And rather than thinking, I need to be proactive here and I need to seek out those opportunities within the organization. So I think for me, I've always wanted to have that two-pronged approach, something that is really beneficial for individuals, for employees in an organization, while at the same time being really useful for organizations to use and to get the most from their people so that they feel really fulfilled and that they can really thrive at work.
Yeah, and this is really powerful stuff. And like you said, we could talk about this for days, you and I, but as we kind of get to the end of this initial conversation, I guess my question for you is, so an organization hears what you said today and they say, we want to talk to Aoife about maybe the path forward, how we might start to kind of implement some of this kind of framework. How might somebody get in touch with you and have this next conversation about the way that you've started to develop the framework for?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would suggest one of two ways. So you can check out my website, which is Happier at Work, and that's all one word,
And it'll be in the link.
happieratwork.ie.
Yep.
It'll be in a link below.
It'll be in
Happier
the
at Work.
link.
happieratwork.ie, and the .ie is for Ireland. So happieratwork.ie. And the other way is LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I'm going to spell my name for people because it's Irish and a lot of people outside of Ireland don't necessarily know how to pronounce it. It's spelled Aoife and it's pronounced Aoife. And my full name is Aoife O'Brien. So Aoife O'Brien.
And so both of those will be in the description below, so people can just click on it and they can also go to you on LinkedIn. So Aoife, before we kind of part ways today, I just wanted to say again, thank you for coming on the program and sharing your experiences, your career, and sharing a little bit more about some of the power that you can impart to women as they navigate through and up in the trajectory of their careers. So again, thank you for coming on Chazin-the-Dream.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Ethan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. And I have a feeling the start of a wonderful and ongoing conversation.
Absolutely.